Good afternoon, everybody. It is a Wednesday, the 31st of May, the last day of May. Hope everybody had a nice and enjoyable, appreciative, relaxing holiday weekend and spend some time, thinking about why we really do celebrate Memorial Day. And so we've got a group of people here now today and for the next few weeks, as you've seen on the schedule, is Aaron scheduled for talking about software. We have today's topic is addressed. We have a topic, I think, Friday that will look at a couple of things. And then if you have questions, though, about topics that deal with software and so forth, shoot them off to either Aaron or myself or both of us. We will put them on the schedule so that it's scheduled. We will be recording these. So we do ask that you keep focused on the topics at hand. And if you have other questions, we may get to them about software. You say we're going to be covering that on a different day. All right, Aaron, it's all yours. Thanks for being here for us.
Appreciate it. Yeah, like Rob said, I don't know what everybody wants to know, what you need to know. So by all means, anything to do with software, training, mapping, feel free to send in recommendations and I will be more than happy to cover those. So for today, as posted, we're going to talk about Artifact. Any questions you guys have, feel free to just chime in. I think we've got everybody unmuted at this point. So we should be good. So I guess we'll start. I kind of want to start a little bit outside of the software. This is the NewMind knowledge base. For those of you that aren't aware that this exists, it is out there. It's got a bunch of different topics on it, but this is one I wrote up on electrical interference. So Artifact, we can get Artifact not only from small muscle movements, twitches, but also outside interference. And the biggest one is electrical. If you're in North America, our power grid runs at 60 hertz. If you're in Europe or South America, your power grids are running on 50 hertz. And especially in places like Colombia, Bogota, like Colombia, for example, their power companies do not filter the electricity as well as some of the power companies in North America. So we see a lot more interference there. Just so everyone knows, though, our equipment is designed to handle both power grids. We do have filters built in to block out both 50 and 60 hertz. So for the most part, we're okay, but we still do occasionally run into problems. It's for this reason why, as from a support standpoint, I don't recommend ever using a desktop computer. Desktop computers cannot be isolated from the power grid. Of course, we all know if you unplug a desktop computer, you can't use it. So diagnosing issues with a desktop is almost impossible unless I'm on site and I can bring like a laptop and do it that way, which we've had to do before. But the link for this is in the chat section, so I'm not going to read through all of this. You can click on the link, save that. You can look at it later, plus you'll still have access to all of this. But diagnosing interference issues from an electrical power grid, there can be a lot of different things that affect it. So things we can look at is, making sure that the power cable for your computer, so the charging cable from your laptop, always make sure when you get a computer, it does have that ground plug. So it needs to have the 3 plugs. Lenovo was really bad for years where they only had 2-prong plug. There was no grounding. And without that grounding plug, it allowed a lot of electrical interference to come in through the transformer on the charger into the computer, which in turn wreaked havoc with electrical interference. Now, with the NewMind technology, and different manufacturers are a little different, depends on how all the filters are built into the circuit board. But the way ours is designed, if you are having electrical interference, what you're going to end up seeing is in the raw data lines up here, you're going to see a 15 hertz signal. So it's going to be very repetitious. It's going to be pattern based. If you actually pause it and you count out, you'll see it's 15 little peaks per second. So it's 15 hertz is what shows up. So if you're seeing a signal like that, both on channel 1 and channel 2, or even channel 3 and 4, if you're doing a 4-channel, you have electrical interference. And the way we are going to look at that, is trying to figure out what's the culprit. So number one, if you're using a laptop, easiest thing to do to start with is just unplug the power. Put everything on battery power and see if it goes away. If it goes away, that means it's either coming from your charger or it's coming from the building itself, actually, the wiring. If your computer does have just a 2-prong plug, easiest thing to do is go to Amazon, search for an aftermarket charger. I recommend this company here, PWR Plus. They sell aftermarket chargers for laptops, pretty much every make and model you can imagine. I've never not found a computer model that they don't carry one for. And PWR Plus always puts a ground plug in. Years ago, in another lifetime of working with neurofeedback, that particular company, we decided to source out Lenovo computers to send out. Little did we know about this problem back then. So the end solution was we bought a bunch of aftermarket chargers, and that solved everyone's issue. So for you out there that you have to buy your own computer, just keep that in mind. If you get a Dell or you get an HP, 98% of the time they will always have the grounding plug, so you won't have anything to worry about. Another thing to consider in your treatment room is fluorescent lighting. Newer technology isn't as bad. Older fluorescent lights, the ballast in the light fixture itself can actually output a field of 60 hertz electricity, or 50 hertz if you're in another country. So I don't recommend using fluorescent lighting. If your current space does have fluorescent and you think that you're getting some issues, I recommend just getting some floor lamps and just use those instead. This is another big one that I still run into at least once a month. So all of us, or most of us, I assume, are using a second monitor for the client to watch their video on. And a lot of us, just the way we design our spaces, we need a bigger screen, because the client's sitting farther back, we've got it mounted on the wall. So a lot of people opt to use a TV, just a regular flat screen TV mounted on the wall. The problem comes in is that they're using HDMI cables. An HDMI cable is a two-way communication cable. It can not only send data out, but it can receive data back in. An example of this is in like the new gaming systems, our PlayStations, our Xboxes. There are settings in there where if a kid turns that system on, it will actually turn the TV on and tune to that input, so they don't even have to do anything. So that is the game system sending information back down that HDMI cable to its origin. Same thing happens with a neurofeedback setup, is that some TVs, just based off how they build them, you've got a big transformer in that TV. It's got to run all the smart functions, and some TV manufacturers aren't as good as others. And what ends up happening is you'll get dirty electricity that travels back down the HDMI cable to your laptop. One possible solution is you can get an HDMI cable that has ferrite magnets built into it. Also on Amazon, they actually sell ferrite magnet kits. They just clamp on to a cable. They'll come in multiple different sizes depending on the size of the cable you have. That's not always a guarantee that that's going to work though. Unfortunately, a lot of conversations I have with clinics end in, I'm sorry, you're going to have to return that TV to the store and try a different one. Unfortunately, I can't give everybody a make and a model that's just going to work, only for the fact that electronic manufacturers are changing components constantly. I mean, even here at NewMind, occasionally we have to do the same thing, especially nowadays with the way electronic parts, the supply is, sometimes a part that a company is currently using isn't available, so the electrical engineers will redesign them. So with a TV, it's a trial and error. Me preferably, I would rather use a computer monitor as my second screen. And that's just because the computer monitor isn't going to be sending any data back. Also, you can also use a VGA cable. So for all the old school people out there, the original monitor cables that we use that had the little pins in it, that's strictly a one-way communication cable, and sometimes can be a godsend when you're running into a lot of interference issues from a monitor. The next one I never really used to talk about, simply the fact that I've always ran an Android style phone, generally Samsung, and I've never had a problem with a Samsung phone interfering at all with neurofeedback equipment. It was a few years back, probably about 3 years ago, my stepdaughter got interested in learning neurofeedback. So I was going to teach her how to do brain maps and run sessions. The day she came over to learn brain mapping, we just happened to be set up in the space in the house that I always use for brain maps. I knew it was electrically clean. We didn't have any issues. And that particular day, once I got the cap on and all the gel injected, there was a massive 60 hertz interference. And I was dumbfounded. And she just happened to mention, she's like, do you think it could be like my phone? And I'm like, well, I've never seen a phone interfere like this, but let's find out. So she shut the phone off. And as soon as the phone powered down, the interference went away. Now, that just happened to be an iPhone. So I don't know what Apple is building into their technology that it outputs that amount of power. It could have just been that the phone she had was faulty. We don't know. But for that reason, I always recommend that you have a no phone policy in your clinic. That's what I did when I worked in a clinic. There was a basket right inside the door. Everybody knew that the phone got turned off completely, went in the basket. That did two things. It made sure, number one, there wasn't going to be any interference issues. Also, number two, they weren't going to be playing around with it and causing physical artifact by looking at it. And I can tell you, I walked in a couple times on teenagers and they were on Instagram or Facebook or whatever app they were on, weren't paying attention to anything. Another big one, and Dr. Suter and I were talking about this a couple months back, is backup battery supplies. I know a lot of offices use these, especially at your front desk. You'll have the battery backup supply in case power goes out, that you guys don't lose any data and you can save it. Unfortunately, battery backups do not play well with neurofeedback equipment. In my office, I've got a ton of electronics. I've never had an issue with electrical interference until I installed a battery backup supply. As soon as I put that battery backup supply in and turned it on, I had nothing but 60 hertz electrical interference. Dr. Suter ran into this as well. He actually had a massive one for the office. I think it was 1 kilowatt. Would have kept a whole office up and running for enough time to get everything saved and all the computers shut down. And he banged his head off the wall, just like I did, until he finally figured out what the culprit was, and it was the battery backup. So I do not recommend having one anywhere near the neurofeedback equipment. Of course, if you want to use it at the front side of your office or in your personal office, that's fine, but just not in the neurofeedback space. Another huge culprit for electrical interference would be power strips. I think we're all probably guilty of this. If we need a power strip, we go to Walmart, we find the cheapest thing on the shelf, we buy that, and then next thing you know, we can't figure out why we're having so many equipment issues. Power strips are notorious. I can tell you probably 75% of the time when I'm talking with a clinic that's having interference issues, once I ask them to start unplugging everything from every outlet in the room, generally when they unplug the power strip, immediately our signal clears up. So whenever possible, try to have all your equipment plugged directly into the outlets and not a power strip. If you have no other option but to use a power strip, spend the money. Buy a brand like Monster brand that actually they build in filters. Monster designs their stuff more for high-end audio equipment. And anybody who's a huge music fan, you know, if you got a high-end audio system in your house, 60 hertz interference can actually, you know, cause problems in the music clarity. So with a Monster brand, there's filters built in. They're going to do a lot better job at removing any of that electrical interference. Plus the other benefit is they do put insurance. A lot of those power strips will have $250,000 worth of insurance built into them. So if you do end up getting a power surge in your office and it damages any equipment, they will replace anything up to $250,000. Now you are going to pay probably $100 for that power strip, but it's going to be a peace of mind for you. For those of you outside of the counseling realm, so our chiropractors, MDs, when you set up neurofeedback equipment, make sure it's at least 20 to 30 feet away from high power medical equipment such as PEMF, high power lasers. Those will wreak havoc. I've seen it many times, especially in chiropractic offices where they'll have a whole room of PEMF devices and they decide to set up the neurofeedback across the hall. Happened in a clinic, they couldn't figure it out. It was like part of the day they had interference, part of the day they didn't. The end culprit was the PEMF because they only ran the PEMF in the morning and that's when they got the interference. So simply moving the neurofeedback equipment, you know, a room down the hall solved their problem. So just kind of keep that in mind in your design of your office space. Try to be conscious if you have your neurofeedback equipment on an outside wall, look at what's on the other side of that wall. If you've got the building's air conditioning equipment outside of that room, you're going to probably need to move your neurofeedback equipment. Those big air conditioning compressors output so much power, they will actually carry straight through a concrete reinforced cinder block wall. So just keep that in mind. If you've kind of gone through a lot of the stuff we've talked about and you're still having problems, move to another room. That's the nice thing about neurofeedback equipment is everything can be ran off battery power. So you can simply unplug the laptop, pick up the amplifier in the laptop, go try another room. Sometimes it's actually the building you're in. You might have a lot of wiring, running through the ceiling of that room. Could be many things. So try relocating to another room. Sometimes that can do it. This is one that a lot of people maybe haven't heard of or don't even think about, is static electricity. So for those of you, East Coast, Florida, West Coast, and California, obviously humidity is not a problem for you guys. I'm out here in Arizona, Colorado, really low humidity. We get a lot of problems with static electricity. And what I have noticed in states that have generally low humidity throughout the year, Colorado is the worst, that if the humidity in the room drops below about 35, 40%, you will start getting some static electricity that builds up. And that will also show up the same as 60 hertz electrical interference. So simple solution, get yourself a cool mist humidifier. At Walmart or even on Amazon, you can find small little humidity meters. They're about $8. And you can just set that on the desk, turn on the humidifier, and just get that room up to about 35, 40%. And that'll definitely take care of your issue. For a lot of you I see on the webinar today are home trainers or do home training. Have a conversation with your home trainers. When they pick up the equipment, let them know that it's not recommended that they set this up in the living room, dining room, kitchen. Of course, compressors are a big electrical interference issue. So if they're near their refrigerator, they're going to have problems, potentially. Not always going to happen, but there could be those problems. So it would be recommended for home trainers, just to save on any hassle, is recommend that they set the equipment up in a bedroom. Or even better yet, if they have a spare room in the house that no one's using, set it up in there. Definitely want to make sure that they're not near the breaker panel for the house, so where all the main power is coming in. We don't want them near the heating and cooling equipment, kitchen, and generally bedrooms are located away from all that. So that's the best advice I can give for your home trainers. And I mentioned about desktop computers, and I know there's those of you out there that have them. You're not going to go and replace them. So if you do have a desktop computer and you're running into problems with electrical interference, go on Amazon and search green wave filter. These are small little devices that plug into your outlet, and then you would plug your computer into the filter, and they are designed to remove that excessive 60 hertz electrical field. I ran into that problem here in Arizona. There was a local clinic not far from me that I tried troubleshooting online. Couldn't solve the problem, so I actually drove over there one day, and that was the issue. She had a desktop computer, of course, plugged into the outlets. When I set up, I brought my laptop and plugged into her amplifier, her leads, and we got a perfectly clean signal. As soon as I plugged my charger in and plugged it into her outlet, I got the same interference issue. So it was a simple solution. They're about, I think you can get 2 on Amazon. They're right about $70. But that's a really good solution. Now, how do you know if you have 60 hertz electrical interference? Well, we're going to use the spectral screen. So let's go ahead and jump into the software. So you'll notice here, and a lot of us probably maybe never even go to this screen, but it's the spectral. Let's go ahead and get a signal coming in. So by default, I'm going to turn this up. By default, we've got these set, actually, they're at 30 Hertz is what we're showing you normally. So if you want to see if you have 60 Hertz interference, what you need to do is come to this frequency option, put the cursor on the plus, and just hold the cursor down. And just go all the way till it stops at 70 Hertz. Now, if you see an elevated line, or what we call a bin line, these are all bin lines. If you see the 60 Hertz bin elevated, then you're running into, you've got a 60 Hertz electrical interference issue. So you can just stay parked on this screen and try some of the solutions that were in that list. Start unplugging things. If you got a phone on, turn the phone off. If all else fails, pick the equipment up and move to another location. Most of you are probably going to be pretty fine. If you haven't run into a problem yet, you probably are good to go. These are generally problems that Jason and I will discover during the first training session with a new clinic, and we'll try to get them resolved immediately before we go any further. But if you want to just double check how clean your office space is next time you run a session on somebody, go to the spectral display, jump it up to 70 Hertz, and look for a 60 Hertz. That is if you're in North America. If you happen to be in Europe or South America, you would see it at 50 Hertz. So just take a look at that. All right, so that's one type of artifact, which is electrical artifact. Big subject, talk about it probably even further. But the one that we're going to run into more is artifact from our clients. So as you can see here, these raw lines are going everywhere. I currently have the sensors at FP1 and FP2. I'm talking, my eyebrows are going up and down. I'm blinking. This is a horrible signal. You never want to see this as a raw line in your office while you're training a client. This is not going to end up being a good session. You'll also notice that we're about 3 minutes in to this session, and there is no data posted here. So we have no trend lines. If we actually look, we can see that our thresholds aren't even moving. They're stationary. If I turned on screen fading, and let's get it to the right monitor, you'll notice as I'm talking and as these thresholds are stationary, you'll notice the screen is also stopped fading as well. Now, if I sit still for a second, there we can see as soon as I relax a little bit, we see everything starts moving. So that's the magic of auto artifacting. So I've currently got it set to the default setting where a moderate at 75%. And that's a question that comes up periodically on calls or chats that we get is, hey, I ran a 30-minute session on a client, or I've got a home trainer that when I go look at newmindmaps.com and I look at the training sessions tab, I can see that it's marked that they did a 30-minute session, but I only have 15 or 20 minutes of data showing. I think my software's broken. Okay, so if that happens, that's the auto artifacting kicking in. So you can see up here, it's telling us that it's picking up a ton of artifact. And the way the auto artifacting is designed in the NewMind software is that whenever this artifact pops up, all the feedback's going to stop, and any data acquisition is also going to stop. So it's going to stop logging microvolts of amplitude is going to stop feedback. So either the screen's going to stop fading, or if they're doing tones or a volume fade, all of that's just going to stop. And that does two things for us. Number one, that means at the end of the session, all the data that we look at is nothing but good, clean data. I can tell you, years ago, I used BioExplore exclusively at the other company I worked at. And that software did not have the capability of removing artifact. So it was really difficult, looking at like screenshots, determining, how well the session went, especially if somebody couldn't sit still. And the other bad thing is, if they're moving around a lot, we are now training them based off artifact and not actual, what's going on in their brain. So especially if you've got a kid, and they're a little fidgety, you don't want every time they move for their brain to get reinforced on that, so that way it just always pauses. So if you ever see that where the amount of data at the end of a session does not match the time of the session, just know that whatever remaining time is left over, that's the amount of time your client was moving during the session. So if you only had 20 minutes of data, that tells you for 10 minutes during that 30-minute session, they weren't sitting still, they weren't following directions. Now, guiding a client to reduce artifact can be a chore sometimes. But we can kind of simplify it down, and especially a lot of us hopefully have had an anatomy course. It's really simple to just think about, the muscle system through the face, the skull, the scalp, of where do I have my sensors and what's the closest muscle group. Now, one of the big ones is jaw tension. Now, as I mentioned, I've got these sensors at FP1 and FP2. But just to show you the power of like jaw tension, let me sit for a minute and I'm just going to relax so we can get a good clean signal. And once I get a clean signal, I'm going to bite down really hard on my molars just so you guys can see how far jaw tension can carry. Okay, so I relaxed. There's jaw tension again and again. Okay, so that's all the way up at the prefrontals. So keep that in mind. I see jaw tension causing a lot of issues. There's an instruction I used to use with all my clients. This went for brain mapping and for training sessions. And I would run them through this every single time I hooked them up, regardless of what we were doing, is I would remind them, okay, I need you to relax your forehead. I need your cheek muscles relaxed. I need your jaw relaxed so much that the back teeth don't even touch. And I stress that with them. I want that lower jaw just hanging. Another one is pressing the tongue on the roof of the mouth. So here I'll relax again. So that was just me pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth. And for some people that is completely, it's almost out of their control. It's just something they do unconsciously. I know I find myself occasionally throughout the day sitting like that. I'll be thinking about something and I've got my tongue curled back, kind of resting on the roof of my mouth. I don't even think about it. I also ran into a similar issue. I was training a new clinic. We happened to be using their son as a guinea pig on the mapping. And he was old enough. He was probably maybe 12 or 13. And we got to T3 and T4, and it was just nothing but solid artifact. So I'm running through relax the jaw, trying, to imagine what's going on with this kid. And it was finally the kid said, "Oh, I'm biting the inside of my lip. I do it, unconsciously. It's a habit." I'm like, okay, so stop biting your lip. And as soon as he stopped biting his lip, we got a perfectly clean signal.
Hey, Aaron, Rob here. One more thing about tongue to roof of mouth. One of the things that is often taught when people learn biofeedback for relaxation is putting the tongue to the roof of their mouth as a relaxing exercise. So that could be something that people learned elsewhere, and just so people know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, didn't know that. Thanks. Now, looking at your raw signal, you can kind of isolate what type of artifact it may be. So I don't know if these are actual true terms or not. It's kind of what I've come up with over the years, but artifact shows up in two forms. One I refer to as short burst muscle artifact. That's going to be eye blinks, a cough, a sneeze. So here, if I'm blinking rapidly right now, okay, so that's short burst. So if you think of the frequencies in our brain, our delta range is that kind of 1 to 4 hertz, which means 1 to 4 cycles per minute. That's how we look at frequencies in the brain. So if you think of an eye blink, if I do a slow 1001, 1002, 1003, so that's going to simulate what would look like a huge amplitude delta signal. So if you're seeing these big spikes like that, that means your client is contracting and releasing a muscle in a slow fashion, versus compressed or a contracted artifact. So that would be, again, like jaw tension. So there, or I scrunch up my forehead, make a really mean face. So when you contract a muscle and hold it in contraction, it's going to simulate a high beta frequency. So it's going to be those muscles held in contraction are going to be kind of pulsating up in that 20 to 30 hertz range. So what you're going to see is elevated high beta. Now, contracted muscle tension is the easiest to spot when your clients are training. Now, two ways you're going to see that very easily. Well, actually, three. One is just in the raw lineup here in the oscilloscope. Looking for that tight compression of the lines. So you're going to have high amplitude signal, and the peaks are going to be really close together. Another is just looking at their EMG numbers. So we can see here they're still not red. It's going to take, I think, around 9 or 10 before these actually turn red. I preferably do not like to see them above 2 or 3 when I'm training somebody. If I can get them EMG numbers at about a 1.5 to 2.5, that's perfect. I know my client is just super relaxed. They've got no tension. The other way is just looking at your high beta lines. So we can notice right now, I've been doing a lot of contracted muscle tension, and we see that high beta line has crested over 10 microvolts here. Okay, so for any of you that don't know, it is humanly impossible for our brains to produce more than 10 microvolts of high beta. So if you've got a home trainer, you've got in-clinic trainings, and you're looking at previous sessions or even that particular day's session, and you're seeing that high beta line above 10 microvolts, it's time to have a conversation with that client. What are they doing? Because that's unnatural. So we know immediately that our client is, holding a lot of tension, and we just need to get them to relax. I see this a lot. I get calls from home trainer or clinics that are doing home training, and they're trying to figure out maybe why they only have 15 minutes of data on a 30-minute session, or what's going on. And you see that a lot, especially training kids. They're wiggling around. Another big one as far as muscle tension goes, and this kind of goes for, it doesn't matter what clinic you are, chiropractic clinics are going to definitely see this more, is if you're training at 0102. If you've got a client that has cervical issues, you're potentially going to see a lot of high beta training them at 01 and 02. I know that's where I got my start. I worked at a chiropractic clinic, and it took me a little bit to kind of figure it out. But I started noticing a pattern, that any one of our chiropractic clients that was also doing neurofeedback, if they presented in the clinic with cervical issues, maybe it was a whiplash case, whatever it was, I would always have a problem at 01 and 02. And I would generally notice it when I did the first map on them. When I got to 01 and 02, it was just littered with artifact. So I soon learned that it was coming from where the neck muscles terminate there on the occipital ridge. The tendon ends of those muscles were so tight, you could strum them like a banjo string. So we just kind of reversed the order that they came through our clinic. Instead of them coming into neuro first, they would go maybe on decompression, they would get a massage, they would get an adjustment, whatever was in their plan for them to do, they would do all of that first, and then they would come in for neurofeedback. Now, for those of you that are medical, MD clinics, counseling clinics, you don't have all that available in your clinic. So for those clients, you might want to recommend that they seek chiropractic care, get under the care of a massage therapist, or maybe if you're lucky, somebody in your office has experience in massage or trigger point work, and you can just do a little 5-minute warm up on them and try to get that tension out of them. But things to keep in mind, frontally, that's probably going to be one of the worst areas is training prefrontals, especially on kids and adults. And I also want you to keep in mind the video content you let them watch. I know Rob is a huge fan of eyes closed sessions using audio only. If I was to start a practice back up, I would follow that same suit. Just for the simple fact that their eyes are closed, everything is relaxed, they're generally more relaxed, and you're going to tend to get a lot less artifact that way. Versus doing an eyes open session with a movie. And I know not everybody follows the recommendation on videos, and there's clinics that let their clients watch the Fast and the Furious or Rambo or action movies in general. Even if you tell the client not to emote, not to react to that movie, their nervous system is going to react, outside of their control. A car comes flying over a freeway at 100 miles an hour in a fiery ball of flame, they're going to tense up, or if your clinic, you happen to let them watch horror or thriller movies, which is highly not recommended. You get the teenager walking through the forest and the axe murderers there. yeah, their nervous system is going to tense up, you know, and you're just going to get nothing but artifacts. So keep that in mind, that sometimes it's not the client intentionally doing it. You know, it could just be that, you know, the videos you're allowing your clients to watch are not appropriate for neurofeedback. And I know Dr. Suter and Rob have brought this up before. I know Dr. Suter used more self-help videos. You know, what is anxiety? What is depression? How can we help ourselves? So keep that in mind. And I can tell you from personal experience, for those of you that don't know, my dad had a stroke 2.5, 3 years ago. And you know, anytime we do neurofeedback, you know, he would want to watch what he wanted to watch, which was generally you know, mystery stuff or vampires, or and anytime that I would cave in and allow him to watch what he wanted to watch, I would see nothing but high EMG numbers. And then when I say high, I'm talking like 12, 15. High beta lines, you know, we're pushing, you know, 14, 15 microvolts. Now, when I took my own advice that I give to clinics, and I would force him into watching something like Moving Art on Netflix. So if you guys don't know about that show, it's amazing for neurofeedback. Again, the title is called Moving Art. It's on Netflix. There's about 20 episodes. They're right about 28 minutes long, so it's not a full 30-minute session, but 28 minutes is still a good session. But what Moving Art is the videographer traveled the world and just did video of the most beautiful places you can imagine on the planet. And then they set that video to some nice, quiet music. You know, it's kind of like spa atmosphere music. If I use
Elevator.
that, yes, exactly. Elevator
Another
music.
one, by the way, is called Relax TV. That can be purchased on Amazon. It's called Relax TV, and it's
Okay.
just very mellow music. I don't like music with singing because then people start singing along, and that's no good. And it's just different still shots, you know, rivers, mountains, and all forth. And let me also add, when you were talking about eyes closed training, which I prefer to do for anxiety, pain, and sleep issues. If they fall asleep during an eyes closed training, guess what? They still train beautifully. The brain
Yes.
does not shut down. The brain hears those tones. And I've treated people with 40 sessions of eyes closed training, and they've done incredibly well and walked out the door happy campers.
It's good. Yeah,
I
it's
would I would also like to add that sometimes your clients don't want to, or at least some of mine, they don't want to interrupt the session, but they have to go to the bathroom, and you
Mm.
start to see an increase in that high beta. So, so I always like to remind my clients before we get started, you need to use the restroom before we get started.
that's good, Veronica. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it's nothing worse than having to disconnect a client. Let them use the restroom. I've had to do it before with brain maps. It wasn't fun. So let me wrap this up with, I'm going to sit quiet for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I am going to disconnect some sensors from the amplifier. And that way we can simulate artifact from a broken sensor. So sensors are going to break. It's part of being in neurofeedback. But we need to recognize the difference of what happens when certain sensors go bad, or we don't use a certain sensor, or we put a sensor in the wrong spot. So I'm going to sit still. I'm going to disconnect channel 1 after I get a clean signal, and we can look at what a broken sensor at channel 1 looks like. All right, so we can see channel 2, I'm not talking, we've got a normal signal. Notice channel 1, we've got just vertical bars running across. Okay, so anytime a sensor is not making contact with the client's scalp, this is what you're going to see. If you're doing a brain map and you see this, and generally the brain map screen will just be, it'll look like somebody scribbled with colored pencils all the way across the screen. That's either you just missed a sensor, which can happen, happens to the best of us, or you might even have a wire broken in your cap. If you're doing a training session and you're seeing this, know it's whatever channel you're seeing it on, that sensor went bad. You know, if you want to confirm that, unplug channel 2 and switch the 2 sensors. You know, if your problem, you know, if this signal transfers over to channel 2 and channel 1 clears up, that's your confirmation that, you know, that channel 1 sensor broke. So we can plug it back in. Now we've got a good connection again. Same thing, we disconnect channel 2. We'll see that same thing. We're just going to get those vertical bars across the graph. Now, reference and ground. We'll wait for our signal. Oop, helps if I plug it into channel 2 and not channel 4. There we go. So let's look at a faulty ground. So notice that signal changed quite a bit. Now it almost looks like like muscle tension, you know, but we're seeing it left and right. You know, so that's a faulty ground, and I'll just be quiet for a minute. So kind of similar to nothing even being connected, but we actually have kind of a pattern developing. Okay, so we'll plug the ground back in. Okay, so now let's take a look at a faulty reference. So that would be a bad ear clip. So now we have a flat line. So if you ever run into this, where you're like, what's going on? I'm just getting this flat line, that's a bad reference. You know, so a reference needs to find 0 power, and that's how we're calculating the amplitude of all your signals. So if you don't have a good reference, you're going to see that. And same happens. You may be wondering, why am I seeing that on both sides? And the reason is that we're doing linked ears. You know, so with the linked ears, it doesn't matter if one is bad, both are bad, you're going to get that problem. You know, it's for this reason why I always suggest, if you don't have backup sensors in your clinic, get a set. You know, we got a few months away, but Black Friday will be coming around before we know it. You know, that's a great time. Stock up on some extra sets of leads while they're on sale. You know, keep them in the clinic. I also do recommend, even if you're doing 2-channel trainings in your clinic, you may think, okay, I can save a couple bucks by just buying a 2-channel electrode set. I don't need the 4-channel. I don't do 4-channel. I would recommend buying the 4-channel set. So you'll have 2 extra cup sensors, and you know, you can utilize those you know, for a bad ground, a bad channel 1, a bad channel 2. In a pinch, you could use them as a reference. You know, but getting a cup sensor to stick to an ear isn't as easy. You'd probably have to use like surgical tape and just tape it onto the earlobe, but that could be done.
They can also use the mastoid right behind the ear. You know, it'll stick better there than on probably the earlobe.
Yeah, true. And that's as well for ground. You can put ground there.
Yep.
So we're at the end of the hour. Anybody have any last questions here? If so, you can either ask now or always feel free to email me. It's just erin@newmindtech.com. And I did post the knowledge base page, this one. It's in the chat panel. So if you find your go to webinar control panel, yours is probably collapsed, just hit the little top button. It's an orange box with a white arrow. Look down, you'll see the chats. And I'll post this link. This is being recorded. So I'll get this edited. We'll get it up onto the YouTube page. I'll send a link out on the listserv to view the video, and I'll also put a link to the knowledge base in there, just so everybody has that. So a lot of good stuff in there, computer requirements and home training information. Just so everyone knows, this home training information is awesome. You can copy this, paste it into an email to your home trainers, and they get the software download link, they get a how-to video, and they get a nice checklist of what to do before, during, and after their session. So save you guys a lot of talking and headache with your home trainers. So, all right. So we'll be back.
Well, let's also say if anybody has remaining questions about today's topic, email them to us, please. We can always pick up and cover those things. And if you have an unusual looking screen, take a screenshot. Send it off to Aaron or send it off to us, and we'll get it to Aaron and we'll discuss it with the next session.
Definitely.
Great stuff, Aaron. Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And maybe questions on Friday if people have some questions from this. Or because we've got a number of opportunities to address these questions. If it's not Friday, it can be Monday night.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you Friday.
See you Friday.